Ms. Rooks, and also the Pinellas County Museum for hosting this exhibit. But the thing about African American entertainment is that, of course, you know, much of it's influenced by our African American roots, and then also our coming in contact with European roots. And that's how our music evolved. And another thing too is one of the main reasons why it evolved so quickly and had such an influence on African Americans is because intellectual development amongst the slaves was shunned. So the only expression was emotional expression. And that emotional expression was expressed through music, and not a little bit of art, you know, woodworking, carving and all, but mainly music, song, dance. And that's what this exhibit is all about. And of course, music has played a strong part in the civil rights movement and the freedom movement. But I'd like to start from the beginning. Probably the most famous, the earliest famous African-American entertainer is Elizabeth Taylor Greenfield. She was born in Natchez, Mississippi around 1809. And she was owned by a lady that eventually moved up north. And her name was Taylor Greenfield also. And she became a part of the anti-slavery movement. And it was discovered that Elizabeth Taylor Greenfield could hear a song and almost mimic it perfectly. So she started giving concerts, and eventually she appeared in Europe and all over. But Elizabeth Taylor Greenfield is the first really famous African-American entertainer. So then it comes, also there was another gentleman named Ira Aldridge. Ira Aldridge was he was born in the North, and he became an actor. And this is around early 1800s. And eventually he went to Europe. And Ira Aldridge was almost like the Muhammad Ali of that era, because he appeared everywhere. He was in Russia, he was in Europe, Switzerland, England. And he was extremely famous. And eventually when African Americans here during like the 1830s and 40s and 50s and 60s, eventually learned about him, they started naming their own acting groups after Ira Aldridge. So, and the thing about a lot of these entertainers, a lot of movies and documentaries hadn't been made yet. So this is a whole new field that's opened up to a whole lot of young people to really do research and develop movies and documentaries about them. Okay, now if you can see that there's a dress in there with a magic act, and it's red and yellow. This dress was owned by a lady named Ellen E. Armstrong. Her father's name was J. Harford Armstrong, and it started at about 1889 in Spartanburg, South Carolina. But J. Harford Armstrong was one of the early Black magicians, and he traveled all across the East Coast and and also in Canada. And eventually, when he passed away, Ellen Armstrong became a magician. Of course, she was a part of the act as a child, and she was born in 1914, but she became a part of the act around 1920s, 30s. But she performed all the way up into the 1940s. And they had an article in the Ebony magazine, I think around 1950s or something like that, talking about Ellen Armstrong. She was the first Black female famous magician. And the thing about that, what's really strange about that is that I knew two guys that were, of course, you all probably have seen this program called American Pickers. Well, they were serious pickers. They went to an antique show in Raleigh, North Carolina, and they were traveling through Columbia, South Carolina, and they saw this African-American lady sitting on a porch. And well, they went through the African-American community. A lot of pickers went through the black, well, mainly white pickers went through African-American communities trying to find old things and buy. So this lady was sitting on the porch, and I knew them personally. One was a county policeman, and the other one, he was just a antiques dealer. One name was Melvin. He yelled at the lady, "You got anything you want to sell?" And Ellen Armstrong was an old lady. Nobody hardly knew about her. Her career had gone down. And she said, "Yeah, I got a whole shed full of stuff in the back." And they bought most of the stuff, but now that stuff is extremely valuable. The University of South Carolina has collected as much as they could. The Armstrong papers, maybe about 20 years ago, I bought a large portion of their photo album, and I think I paid like $1,000 for it. And I eventually I made a foolish move and sold the photo album, and I kept about 6 photographs and that dress that you can see in that magic act, and I had it appraised, and the guy said just the 5 photographs and the dress in the magic act is worth over $6,000. So I can't imagine what those photographs are worth now. So then I'd like to talk about a lady named Maud Cooney Hare. Maud Cooney Hare is extremely important because she was one of the early Black musicologists. And this was around the turn of the century. And she went around performing, and she had recitals with a pianist, and she talked about African and African-American music, which a lot of our people weren't exposed to at that particular time. Music like what they call Creole music, music from people from around Louisiana, New Orleans. And also a lot of people weren't really, except for African-Americans, weren't really exposed to what they call Negro spirituals. So she went around and had piano recitals and gave lectures about music, just like I'm giving a lecture right now. And also she, her father, they were from Texas, and they could easily pass for white, but they didn't. And I think it was W.E.B. Du Bois that hired her as a writer for his Crisis magazine around 1914, 1915. And it was rumored that he was going to marry her, but he never did. But she's a very interesting person, really, really important as far as African-American entertainment is concerned. Then you'll see a lot of photographs signed to a guy named Pinckney Roberts and Little Pinckney Roberts. Well, Little Pinckney Roberts is almost totally unknown, but anybody that was an important entertainer during the 1930s, 40s, 50s, it didn't matter whether it was Count Basie, whether they were Black or white, Pinckney Roberts was the MC for those shows. And he was a really flashy guy, and he called his program Pinckney Roberts Fashion Palette. And you know, like some guys wearing real flashy colors. Well, he did this back in the 1930s and 40s. But a lot of those photographs are signed to Pinckney Roberts, who was a entertainer and an MC. Now, also, it's called, let's see, Black Swan Records. Okay, I talked about Elizabeth Taylor Greenfield in the very beginning, but during 1920, there was a guy named Harry Pace that went to Atlanta University and moved to New York. And he started the first really major Black record company, and it was called Pace Records. And eventually he changed it from Pace Records to Black Swan Records to honor Elizabeth Taylor Greenfield. So, and the point here is that there, even during the 1920s and 30s, a lot of African Americans, not a lot, but educated African Americans were real race conscious. So in memory of Elizabeth Taylor Greenfield, who was formerly a slave, he renamed his record company Black Swan Records, because Elizabeth Taylor Greenfield actually, her stage name was the Black Swan. And the reason why is because during that time, during the 1830s and 40s, there was a white lady that was an opera singer, and she was known as the White Swan. So they called Elizabeth Taylor Greenfield the Black Swan, and eventually Harry Pace renamed his record company Black Swan Records. Now, Black Swan Records only lasted for about 2 or 3 years. And the funny thing about Black Swan Records is that most of the African Americans that were involved in beginning this record company were well educated. And to give you an example, on the board of directors was W.E.B. Du Bois and the Johnson brothers, who wrote the Negro National Anthem. So what happened was they said, no, when we start this record company, we're going to put out classical music and violin music. And well, they tried that. And the company almost failed in the first couple of months that they started. And they decided to hire a lady named Ethel Waters. I don't know whether y'all familiar with Ethel Waters, but she was a great entertainer. And she sang one song called, oh goodness, I can't think of it right now. But anyway, the record is up on the wall. And that one record put Black Swan Records out of debt. So it was Ethel Waters that really saved Black Swan Records. But eventually, the whole deal about the record company was this. If you're kind of aware, record players were as large, record players were really furniture in the house. And only furniture stores sold record players during the 1920s and 30s and a little earlier. So in order to sell record players, you had to sell records. So that was the big thing. And they weren't really interested in African-American entertainers until they realized that they could sell more record players if they recorded them. So eventually, the African-American entertainment in the record industry was almost ignored until they realized, look, we can sell more record players if we sell some of this stuff. So they started recording Bessie Smith and a whole lot of other people that were, you know, totally unknown to the general public. So then I want to talk about Rex Ingram. Rex Ingram was he was a graduate of Northwestern University. He was born in 1892. I think he went to school for medicine, and what happened was when he graduated out of college, he moved to California, and he was on the street corner performing, and he was hired on the spot. And if any of you remember seeing some of the old Tarzan movies and some of them were silent, Rex Ingram was one of the natives in those Tarzan movies. But ultimately, eventually, Rex Ingram becomes the first African-American to sign a contract on a soap opera in the 1950s. So Rex Ingram was important also. Okay, another individual, we know about ragtime through Scott Joplin, but during that time, there was a man named Tom Turpin from where I live in Savannah, Georgia, who was a ragtime pianist, and eventually he moved, and he became a night, well, it was at that time was saloon owner, and he was the first person to have a piece of ragtime music published. His name was Tom Turpin. So what I want to do is, I know when y'all walked in, y'all had y'all viewed a few pictures, and if y'all have any questions, I'd like to entertain a few questions instead of just doing a lot of talking, because it's hard for me to see what I'm looking at with the Zoom. So if you tell me, oh, let me tell you about oh goodness, I'll think of his name in a minute. But anyway, if I could see that picture, but it's related, as I said, a lot of African-American music was really tied to the civil rights movement. And one of the most famous individuals is, I can't hardly see that picture in the back, and I can't remember his name right off. But anyway, what happens is he was a band director, an orchestra director in New York City during around 1914. And he was a member of the 15th Regiment of New York. And it was a volunteer regiment. And when World War I came about, they changed the 15th Regiment to the 369th Regiment, and they fought in World War I. And the 369th Band is kind of credited for taking jazz music to Europe during World War I. And the reason, and they made posters during around 1918, and one of the posters said the 369th of the 15th New York, first men on the front line, colored men. And how that happened was that they took the 15th Regiment out of New York City and had them trained in Columbia, South Carolina. And they were warned not to do that because, a lot of African-Americans that lived in New York, they were, had some degree of respect and freedom. So when they went to South Carolina and they were walking around with uniforms on, it upset a whole lot of people in Columbia. So eventually a race riot broke out, and the president had to send out a special order to have them shipped immediately to Europe. And when they were shipped to Europe, they ended up on the front line. And that's how African Americans ended up representing the USA. And they were the first on the front line in World War I. And so now, as I said, since I'm not there and I can't really see what I'm looking at, do you have any questions? Oh, and another thing I'd like to bring out also is that there are many instruments that Africans brought here. And one of the major instruments, which is really strange because African Americans don't listen to banjo music, but the banjo is actually a African American invention. And it was brought here as a gourd with strings on it. And eventually, and I don't know exactly how, but there were African Americans in the Appalachian Mountains. And the whites in that area adopted the instrument, and eventually they started using the instrument, and African Americans stopped using the instrument. Of course, you saw minstrels, you had a lot of African American banjo players, but eventually banjo playing died amongst African Americans, and it ended up being a major instrument in country music. So any questions from anybody?
Can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd like to ask, first of all, I'd like to thank you, Mr. Jones, for giving this presentation. I had a question about, I thought the only cotton club in the world was Cotton Club in Harlem on 125th Street. But come now, I'm realizing the cotton clubs were almost in a lot of major cities, that name Cotton Club. Is that right?
Yes. And it's just, well, you know, America is based on cultural trends, and the cultural trend, whatever's famous in New York is famous everywhere, because at one time New York was the center of the universe. Anybody from the South that was African American and they were young, they wanted to go up north, and the target area was Harlem, New York. So when you went to Harlem, New York, and a lot of some African Americans with money, they went up there and they came back. They said, "Look, we can do this down south." So you're absolutely right. A lot of clubs and a lot of styles, dancing. You know, it wasn't no MTV, it wasn't no videos or whatever, but it all came from areas like that. And of course, a lot of dance styles and a lot of music and musical influence, it moved up north also. So it was a back and forth transfer of cultural life between the North and the South amongst African Americans. And eventually it influenced white culture. Because I mean, when I was coming up, the #1 program was Dick Clark Bandstand. And eventually Soul Train completely knocked it out. So that's the way. And of course, everybody knows now that rap music is like the #1 music all over the world. You got Jewish rappers in Israel. So you know, the cultural trend it's a super culture, what I call a super culture, that is all over the world. Any other questions?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Is that song by Ethel Waters, Down Home Blues?
Yeah, that's it. Down Home Blues. She sang that one song, and that was the song that saved Black Swan Records from going under. But eventually, as I said, it went under anyway, and Columbia Records and other record companies realized this is a untapped market. So that was the that's how that happened. Oh, and the famous musician that went to Europe with the 369th band, his name was James Reese Europe. And unfortunately, I think it was in Boston, he had an argument with one of the band members, and that's how he was killed. Any other questions?
Music? Yeah. That's a question about gospel music.
Okay. Oh, okay. Gospel music. The thing about gospel music is that well, one thing about gospel music, you see in the back, there's a picture of a guy named Hall Johnson. And one of the most famous Black movies outside of Imitation of Life was a movie called Green Pastures. And Hall Johnson was the choir director with the choir, and he became famous as a choir director, but actually Hall Johnson started out as a violinist. And he taught himself how to play violin, and eventually he became a concert violinist. Okay, any other questions?
Yes, the entertainment you mentioned, Eldridge, didn't he play Othello in Europe in the 1800s?
Yeah, yes, he did. Our Aldridge. Yeah, our Aldridge played Othello, and the thing about our Aldridge also was he always, not all of the time, but a lot of his plays that he played in were like controversial, racially toned plays. In other words, he addressed a lot of social issues going on during slavery. And the ironic thing about Ira Aldrich was that in the 1830s, he actually was married to a white lady for a long time. And there was a white couple that were married, and the wife had a child, and they believed that the child was Ira Aldrich's child. And in England, the English law was that the husband could sue the father that fathered a child outside of the wedlock. And Ira Aldrich was sued, and he lost the case. He had to pay. But eventually, Ira Aldrich spent a lot of time in the Soviet Union and Russia also. But as I said, Ira Aldrich was like the Muhammad Ali of that particular time. He was one of the most popular African Americans in Europe. No movie has been, well, if there's a documentary made about him, I'm not aware of it. But as I said, there is so much ground to be covered now that it's unbelievable. So many musicians and actors that were really important that hadn't been talked about. The guy, Pinckney Roberts, his life was fantastic, unbelievable life. He was called Little Pinckney Roberts. He could sing, dance, act, he could do it all. And of course, you know, that was the thing about being a Black entertainer. If you went for trials, they wanted to know, could you sing? You had to sing, dance, act, whatever they asked you to do, you had to say, yeah, I can do that too. So that's the thing about African Americans. Now there are a few that can do that now. Wayne Brady, he can do a lot of stuff. And then in the past, Sammy Davis Jr., he could do almost anything, sing, dance, act, tell jokes, whatever, you know. So when you're in the entertainment field, it's not like right now where, you know, a rapper, they say, well, look, we want you to rap a couple of lines and then sing a few verses. They said, no, they can't even do that. They can't do two things. They can just do one thing. That's it. Okay, any other questions?
One of the entertainers that really piqued my interest was Clarence Williams. Right away, I thought of Clarence Williams.
Oh, okay. Clarence Williams, during the 1930s and 20s, was a prolific piano player, writer, band organizer. He was just an all-around entertainer. And very few people know, I don't know whether y'all familiar with this TV program that used to come on called Mod Squad with Clarence Williams III. Well, Clarence Williams III is the grandson of Clarence Williams from the 1920s. In other words, he came from entertainment royalty. And for some strange reason, it skipped one generation because Clarence Williams' father, I don't think he was an entertainer, but his grandfather was a super entertainer and a super promoter. Okay. Any questions?
How about the, how much do they get paid? Was this, were they paid comparable to their skill sets, or was it just, they did it for the love of what they were doing?
Well, they had a old saying, and they used to call it the TOB circuit. And the TOB means tough on Black entertainers circuit. This was like the 1920s and the 30s. But the thing that stands out the most is that a large majority of the Black entertainers, and I'm trying to think of, I just read one where, oh, his name was Tim Moore. Tim Moore was a singer, actor, and this was around the 1920s and 30s. And even before then. But the strange thing about Tim Moore is that he was also a boxer, and he fought Jack Johnson. but he was a big guy. And at one time, Tim Moore was earning something like $500 a week. That was a lot of money back then, when a loaf of bread was a nickel. And eventually, when Tim Moore was hired when television came in to act in Amos and Andy. And of course, a lot of people don't realize Amos and Andy actually were white people with black face. And eventually they had Tim Moore, they called him out of retirement, to play this part called Kingfish. And what happened was the NAACP drilled the producers of that television program and forced them to stop it, because they said that it just was the wrong kind of image to be shown on television. But speaking about pay, eventually when Tim Moore passed away, he had one residual check from television, and I think it was something like $32. In other words, he didn't even have enough money for him to be buried. And this is not unusual. Sammy Davis Jr., same problem. Red Fox, same problem. You know, one old black actor from vaudeville, he made a song, "You're unlucky when it's all going out and nothing coming in." And that's what happened, because, you know, you get in that lifestyle. Of course, I mean, I wouldn't know how it is, but you know how it is when you start spending and you think it's just never ending, and it ends. So yeah, they made, a lot of black actors made pretty good, and some of them made just enough to eat. And of course, you know, and you had some entertainers, you know, sometimes people ask me, man, how you doing? I say, I'm doing all right. I say, how you doing? They say, well, there ain't no need for me to complain. Nobody won't listen to it. I say, yeah, if you learn how to play a guitar, a lot of people listen to your complaints. So, and what I'm alluding to is the fact that a lot of African Americans that didn't make much or had to work real hard saw entertainment as a way out. And a way out of, not necessarily become a big or important person, but a way out of hard work, hard labor, and a way out of the cotton fields and the tobacco fields, a way out. And you'll find that a lot of early African-American entertainers, they came from the South and they left at early ages, like 15, 16 years old, going to Philadelphia, New York, looking for a new way of life, because they wanted to get off them cotton fields. Any other questions?
Wasn't Stephen Fetchit one of the richest African-American actors during his time?
Stephen Fetchit was one of the highest paid actors, period, at one time. But he came under serious scrutiny and fire, and especially from the NAACP. And they said that this was a terrible image that he was portraying, and, you know, that scratching your head, you know, whatever. So, but now the strange thing about Stephen Fetchit was, and I'm surprised that they didn't bring this out. I don't know whether any of y'all have been watching the documentaries on Muhammad Ali. But Muhammad Ali was a real giving person, and a lot of people don't know this, but Stephen Fetchit actually went to Muhammad Ali training camp, because, you know, Stephen Fetchit was he was blackballed by blacks, you know, even in his old age. You know, they saw him as the Uncle Tom image. You know, we should know. And he asked Muhammad Ali, could I be a part of your training camp? And Muhammad Ali said yes. And I actually have a photograph of Stephen Fetchit and Muhammad Ali at a training camp. But he tried to redeem himself. Any other questions?
Sir, can you speak to, like, the connection between race, like what people used to call race music, race records, and like the development of rock and roll?
Okay, could somebody closer to the mic repeat that? Could you come closer? I didn't hear.
Yeah, thank you so much for being here. Can you speak to the connection between what people often call like race records or race music and the development of rock and roll?
Oh, yeah, okay. Well, you know, the thing about this, what I refer to as the American superculture started a long time ago. And the thing about race records was that it was extremely popular amongst African Americans. And of course, you always got people, entrepreneurs, that's looking at what's going on in the culture, even back in the 1920s and 30s. And they said, look, this thing is popular amongst African Americans, maybe it might work on us. So they what they did at first, and I know you're aware that they took some Black songs made by Black singers, and then they gave famous white singers the same song. And then eventually, you know, they went from one thing, okay, all right, you can sing the song, but then the next move is, all right, you got to have a little movement with it now. So then they had, and then of course, you know, what really broke the scenes was Elvis Presley, because he had the songs and the movement. And entrepreneurs saw big dollars in him. And of course, the rock and roll movement, they said, well, look, if that thing works over here, let's take it over to Europe. And that's exactly what they did. So I see it kind of as a good thing, but I understand the economic scheme behind it. You know, it's always, okay, let's try it with this group. If it works with them, then we'll try it all over the world because it's a moneymaker. And that's exactly what happened. They took rock and roll over to Europe. People, what you might call has-beens, Willie Dixon, blues people that were completely ignored by Black people because they'd say, oh, that's old music or whatever. They took it over to Europe, and these people had a whole new career. And they didn't, and a lot of them, they say, I'm not going back to America no more. He said, all the money is over here. So Black entertainers, blues entertainers that were ignored in America by the Black community became royalty in Europe. And that's how that was. And as I say, the rest is history, because as I said, a lot of I can think of this lady, Thorpe. She could sing and play guitar. Rosetta Thorpe, Big Mama Rosetta Thorpe. Her career was kind of down in America, but when she went over to Europe, it exploded all over again. So you know, you look at things, and you got to look at things on the top part and the bottom part. But you know, the whole thing about entertainment industry is making money. People are into making money, you know. So you got people that understand that, look, we'll try it here, and if it works here, let's take it over there. And that's been the trend. I mean, you can easily see it. You know, you look at the Beatles, Mick Jagger, and all of them. All of the heroes were people that were has-beens here in America, really has-beens. And when they went over there, it was a whole new world over there. Any other questions?
Mr. Jones, we have,
I have one more question. Are we ever gonna get rid of rap?
What's that now?
I said, are we ever gonna get rid of rap music?
No. No. And let me explain to you, the culture that you live in is what they call an organic culture. It's constantly growing. Rappers have created language that's now in American Standard dictionaries now. That's the kind of influence that they have, new words. Now, I can remember when I was a little boy, what's up? You know, you say, what's up? People be looking around, what is he talking about? That's in the dictionary. So, I mean, you know, it's kind of like get used to it. So and the thing about that is also is that there's good and bad in everything. And I do believe there's some good rap music. You know, I'm almost 70 years old. There is some good rap music, and then there's some rap music that's appalling. Y'all just don't know. Some rappers now, and I got a son that's kind of involved in the music industry. They're rapping about how many people they actually killed. You know, I mean, at one time we used to hear about gangster rap. They were just rapping, but these people are actually doing it and rapping it. So, you know, there's a good and bad in everything. So we try to take the good, and like an old man say, eat the meat and spit out the bone. That's basically what you got to do, eat the meat and spit out the bone, because, hey, they got church rappers now. You go to church right now, and you don't know whether you're going to listen to a choir or a rapper. Huh? Kirk Franklin is a rapper, and he's famous, and his music is good. I don't know whether I answered your question or not. You might not have liked that answer, but I'm just giving you, hey, like they say, I'm just keeping it real.
I was hoping you would say, don't say we only got a few more years sitting for this, but I guess not.
Any other questions?
If not, on behalf of the Pinellas County African History Museum, the Kurt Sue and Paul, Coalition of Clearwater Urban
Leadership Coalition, that's right.
We would like to thank you for this tremendous presentation.
Well, I appreciate your interest and your attention. Of course, you know, it's been a long time since I did a presentation on this, so y'all kind of saw where I was kind of feeling my way through it. But after I got in the groove, everything kind of smoothed out. Yeah. And thank you.